To the world, she was just another loving wife and devoted mother. But behind closed doors, Naomi Harris was living a dangerous game, one that would end in blood, obsession, and betrayal. No one knew the lengths she'd go to satisfy her desires. No one knew the bodies would pile up until it was too late. Naomi Harris stood on her front porch, the soft Brooklyn breeze brushing against her smooth brown skin as she waved goodbye to her two children heading off to school. From a distance, Naomi appeared to be the ideal housewife, a devoted mother with a perfect life. She lived in a comfortable brownstone on a tree-lined street with her hardworking husband, Marcus, who had built a successful career as a civil engineer. To the outside world, they were the picture-perfect Black American family, respected by their neighbors and admired by their community. But Naomi had a secret, one that she carried beneath the flawless facade of a dutiful wife. Behind the innocent smile she flashed to her neighbors and friends, there was a woman leading a dangerous hidden life, one that would eventually spiral into obsession and murder. At 35, Naomi had grown tired of her routine existence. It wasn't that she didn't love Marcus. She did in her way. But their marriage had grown cold, their once passionate connection dulled by the mundanity of everyday life. Marcus spent long hours at work, often returning home exhausted, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts and her desires. The loneliness gnawed at her. She felt invisible in her own home, craving attention, excitement, and the kind of passion she hadn't felt in years. That's when she turned to something she never imagined: affairs. It started innocently enough, or so she convinced herself. A simple profile on a discreet dating app, under a fake name, just to see who might be interested. But what began as curiosity quickly became a web of deceit, as Naomi found herself not just involved with one man, but three. Each of these men fed into her darkest desires, but each had his own twisted agenda. Tyrone Williams was a 27-year-old fitness trainer who exuded raw energy and masculinity. He was tall, muscular, and covered in intricate tattoos that wrapped around his arms and chest. His smooth chocolate skin and chiseled body made Naomi feel alive in ways Marcus never did anymore. Tyrone was dangerous. Something about his unpredictability excited her, like playing with fire. He was obsessed with control, always needing to know where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. Though his possessiveness often suffocated her, Naomi couldn't get enough of the adrenaline rush that came with their encounters. Tyrone made her feel desired, but his dark jealousy would soon lead to more than just emotional wounds. Then there was Jamal Davis, the wealthy businessman who swept her off her feet with his sophistication and success. Jamal, 40, was the kind of man who knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. He drove a sleek black Mercedes and owned a luxury penthouse downtown, far removed from Naomi's cozy Brooklyn home. His deep baritone voice sent shivers down her spine, and the way he spoiled her with designer clothes and expensive jewelry made her feel special, important, like she deserved more than the mundane life she had with Marcus. Jamal was possessive in a different way. He didn't want to share Naomi, not with anyone. He saw her as an object of his desire, something to be owned and controlled. But Naomi knew that if Jamal ever discovered the truth about her other affairs, his wrath would be swift and unforgiving. And then there was Elijah Thompson, barely 21 years old and full of reckless passion. Elijah was a college student, bright-eyed and filled with youthful intensity. His lean, athletic build and boyish charm reminded Naomi of the excitement and freedom of her younger years. He didn't have the wealth or power that Jamal did, nor the dominating presence of Tyrone. But Elijah brought something else to the table, an unbridled lust for Naomi that bordered on obsession. He worshipped her in a way that made her feel like the center of his universe, but his devotion quickly became suffocating. Elijah was insecure, constantly texting her at all hours, showing up unannounced at her home, and leaving handwritten notes under her door. His obsession was cute at first, but soon it turned dark, and Naomi began to realize that Elijah wasn't just playing around. He was willing to do whatever it took to have her. Naomi had never intended for things to go this far. At first, each affair provided her with something different, something she thought she needed to feel alive again. Tyrone gave her the physical thrill, Jamal made her feel desired and important, and Elijah filled the emotional void with his undying attention. But now she was trapped in a web of lies that was becoming harder and harder to maintain. Tyrone, the most unpredictable of the three, had started to show signs of suspicion. He followed her one night after they'd met at a downtown hotel, convinced that she was lying to him. Naomi's heart raced as she caught a glimpse of his car in her rearview mirror, but she managed to shake him off before pulling into her driveway. When he confronted her the next day, she played it off, laughing at his accusations. But Tyrone wasn't laughing. His face darkened with jealousy as he grabbed her wrist, hard enough to leave a bruise, and warned her that if she ever betrayed him, there would be consequences. But Naomi couldn't stop. The thrill of juggling these three men, of living a double life, was intoxicating. It was the excitement she craved, the adrenaline that kept her going. She was playing a dangerous game, one that gave her an illusion of control, but in reality her lies were starting to unravel. Jamal, always calculating, had hired a private investigator to follow her. He wasn't going to be played for a fool, not by anyone. And Elijah, young and naive, had begun to lose his grip on reality. His obsession with Naomi was growing, and she could sense it in the way he looked at her, the way he talked to her, as if she were the only thing keeping him alive. Marcus, oblivious to his wife's affairs, was beginning to notice subtle changes in her behavior. Naomi had grown more distant, her phone glued to her hand, her evenings increasingly spent away from home. She told him she was reconnecting with old friends, finding new hobbies, trying to rediscover herself. But Marcus wasn't stupid. He loved Naomi, but he knew something was wrong. He hired someone to follow her, hoping to get answers without confronting her directly. Naomi's world was closing in on her from all sides. Each lover demanded more of her time, more of her attention. Tyrone's jealousy grew dangerous. Jamal's demands became controlling, and Elijah's obsession turned sinister. But Naomi couldn't let go of any of them. The power she felt in controlling these three men, in keeping them wrapped around her finger, was too much to resist. She didn't realize that she was no longer the one pulling the strings, that her secret life was about to explode in a way she couldn't control. It was only a matter of time before the fragile walls of her deception came crashing down. And when they did, the result would be deadly. Naomi Harris thought she could manage the chaos of her double life. She believed she could juggle her three lovers without consequence, keeping her world intact while indulging in her darkest desires. But Naomi had underestimated how deeply she had become entangled in a web of deception and how dangerous the men in her life had become. What started as thrilling passion was morphing into obsession, jealousy, and the looming specter of violence. It was only a matter of time before everything crumbled. Tyrone Williams had always been a force of nature. From the moment Naomi laid eyes on him, she was drawn to the fire that seemed to burn just beneath his skin. His presence was magnetic. Dangerous, yes, but that's what made him so alluring. Tyrone was never one to play by the rules, and in his relationship with Naomi, that volatility made her feel alive. But Naomi didn't realize how possessive Tyrone could become. He wasn't just her secret lover. In his mind, Naomi belonged to him. It started with little things, questions disguised as casual curiosity. "Who you been with today, baby?" He'd ask with a smirk, but Naomi could see the suspicion behind his eyes. At first, she played along, answering his questions and smoothing over his jealousy with sweet lies. But soon, Tyrone's questions became demands. He began following her. Naomi felt the creeping eyes on her back, the weight of his presence even when she couldn't see him. One night after a steamy meeting at a hotel downtown, she noticed his car trailing hers through the Brooklyn streets. Her heart raced as she took sharp turns, trying to shake him off. Sweat slicked her palms as she finally lost him, pulling into her driveway just as the streetlights flickered on. But the next day, Tyrone showed up at her house. He was fuming, his tall, muscular frame filling the doorway like an omen of doom. His usually charming smile was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl that sent a chill through Naomi's spine. "Who the FCK you think you're fooling, Naomi?" His voice was low, dangerous. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers biting into her skin like iron clamps. "You've been lying to me." Naomi tried to laugh it off, but Tyrone wasn't laughing. His dark eyes bored into her, his grip tightening until she winced in pain. "You ain't seeing nobody else, right? 'Cause if I find out you are—" His voice trailed off, but the threat was unmistakable. Naomi knew what Tyrone was capable of. She had seen the violent streak that lurked beneath his smooth exterior, the flashes of rage that could turn him into a monster. But instead of backing away, she was drawn deeper into the fire, convinced she could control him. She was wrong. If Tyrone was fire, Jamal Davis was ice, cold, calculating, and methodical in his pursuit of control. Jamal wasn't the type to throw tantrums or lose his temper. No, his power came from the way he owned every situation he was in, the way he manipulated Naomi with subtle gestures and words that made her feel both wanted and trapped. Jamal was a man used to getting what he wanted, a self-made businessman who had clawed his way to the top. He saw Naomi as a prize, a beautiful object he could buy with luxury gifts and dinners in upscale restaurants. But Naomi wasn't just a toy to him. She was a possession, something to be controlled. When Jamal began to suspect that Naomi was hiding something from him, he didn't confront her with anger. Instead, he took a different approach. He hired a private investigator. Naomi had no idea that every move she made was being tracked, that her secret meetings with Tyrone and Elijah were being documented by a man lurking in the shadows. The PI sent photos and detailed reports back to Jamal, who carefully pieced together the truth. When Jamal finally confronted Naomi, it wasn't with shouting or violence. It was worse. He invited her to his penthouse, as he often did, pouring her a glass of expensive red wine as they settled into his leather couch. Naomi could tell something was off. Jamal's usual smooth charm had a sharp edge tonight, his smile too tight, his eyes too focused. As she took a sip of wine, Jamal slid a manila envelope across the table toward her. "What's this?" Naomi asked, her voice trembling. "Open it," Jamal said, his tone casual but cold. Naomi hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. When she finally opened the envelope, her stomach dropped. Inside were photographs of her with Tyrone, with Elijah, pictures of her slipping out of hotels, meeting them in secret places, her betrayal laid out in black and white. Naomi's mouth went dry as she stared at the evidence of her double life, her carefully crafted lies unraveling in front of her eyes. "You think I'm stupid?" Jamal's voice was calm, but there was an icy fury behind his words. "You think you can play me like some kind of fool?" Naomi opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She was frozen in place, her mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. "I'm giving you one chance," Jamal continued, leaning forward, his eyes locked on hers. "End it. End it with those other men, or I will ruin you. I will destroy everything you have. Your marriage, your life, your kids' futures. Do you understand me?" Naomi nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She promised herself she'd end it with Tyrone and Elijah, but deep down she knew she couldn't. The pull of danger, of excitement, was too strong, and Jamal, as controlling as he was, didn't scare her as much as the others. If Tyrone was fire and Jamal was ice, Elijah Thompson was the storm. Wild, unpredictable, and increasingly unstable. At first, Naomi had been drawn to his youthful energy, the way he idolized her, treating her like the queen she longed to be. But Elijah's obsession was far more dangerous than she realized. He wasn't just in love with her, he was consumed by her. Elijah began texting Naomi constantly. What started as sweet, flirtatious messages soon became overwhelming. He texted her morning, noon, and night, wanting to know where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. His neediness was suffocating, but Naomi ignored the warning signs, seeing his obsession as harmless infatuation, until it wasn't. One day, Elijah showed up at her house unannounced. Naomi's heart stopped when she saw him standing on the front porch, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and a manic smile on his face. Her kids were home, and she couldn't afford for Marcus or anyone else to see Elijah here. She rushed to the door, her voice low and urgent as she hissed at him to leave. "I couldn't stay away," Elijah whispered, his eyes wild and glassy. "I just had to see you." Naomi's skin prickled with unease. Elijah's obsession was spiraling out of control, and she didn't know how to stop it. He began leaving notes for her under her door, scribbled love letters that quickly turned dark and threatening. "If you ever leave me, I'll kill myself," one note read. Another said, No one will ever love you like I do. If I can't have you, no one will. Naomi was trapped. Tyrone was becoming increasingly violent. Jamal was holding her life in his hands, and Elijah was descending into madness. The walls were closing in on her, and for the first time Naomi felt truly afraid. But she couldn't stop. The thrill of it all, the danger, the lies, the passion, it was intoxicating. She was addicted to the rush, even as it pushed her closer and closer to the edge. The final breaking point came one night when all three men collided in Naomi's life like a freight train barreling toward disaster. Tyrone, still furious from their last confrontation, had been watching her. Jamal, determined to assert his control, was ready to confront her again. And Elijah, in the throes of his obsession, was spiraling deeper into madness, convinced that Naomi belonged to him. Naomi's phone buzzed with texts from all three men. Tyrone demanded to see her, Jamal issued his final ultimatum, and Elijah sent cryptic messages about their future together, messages that chilled her to the bone. She knew she couldn't keep juggling them, but she had no idea how to escape the web she had spun. That night, Naomi sat alone in her kitchen, the weight of her double life pressing down on her. Her phone vibrated on the counter, but she didn't pick it up. Outside, the streets of Brooklyn were quiet, but the storm was coming, and Naomi had no idea just how deadly it would be. Naomi Harris sat at the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she stared blankly at the phone in her lap. The texts from Tyrone, Jamal, and Elijah were all piling up, one after the other. Each message seemed more desperate, more threatening than the last. Tyrone's jealousy had boiled over into rage. Jamal's cold manipulation had morphed into a deadly ultimatum. And Elijah's obsession had transformed into something far more terrifying. She could feel it. Something dark was about to happen. She had played the game for too long, and now it was slipping out of her control. It was a humid Friday evening, and the air in Brooklyn felt thick, oppressive, as if the entire city was holding its breath. Marcus had taken the kids to his mother's house for the weekend, giving Naomi the perfect opportunity to clear her head. Or at least, that's what she told herself. The truth was, she couldn't escape the gnawing fear that one of the men, maybe all of them, would show up unannounced. She heard the doorbell ring around 9 p.m. Her heart jumped into her throat. Was it Tyrone? Was it Elijah? Was it Jamal? A sickening thought crossed her mind. What if it's all three? When she peeked out of the front window, she saw Jamal's black Mercedes parked on the street. She let out a sigh of relief, knowing at least she'd have a chance to reason with him. Maybe she could convince him that she was ready to end things with the others, that he was the only one she wanted. Jamal always appreciated control, and if Naomi could make him feel like he still had power over her, maybe this whole nightmare could end peacefully. But when she opened the door, Jamal's expression was different this time. His face was like stone, and in his hand, he held the manila envelope, the same one he had shown her weeks earlier. Only now it looked thicker. "Naomi, we need to talk," Jamal said, his voice low and steady. "Of course," Naomi replied, her pulse quickening as she gestured for him to come inside. But before Jamal could even step foot in the doorway, the sound of screeching tires tore through the quiet Brooklyn street. A black Camaro came speeding down the block, pulling up right next to Jamal's Mercedes. Naomi felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized Tyrone stepping out of the car, his tall, muscular frame silhouetted in the dim streetlight. He was angry, angrier than she had ever seen him. Jamal's eyes narrowed as he took in Tyrone's sudden arrival. "What the hell is this?" he hissed under his breath. Naomi stepped back, her mind racing as the two men squared off in front of her. "Jamal, just go inside," she pleaded. "Tyrone, this isn't the time." "Shut the F-seek up, Naomi," Tyrone snapped, his voice thick with venom. His gaze was locked on Jamal, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think you can keep playing me? You think you can make me look like a damn fool?" "Tyrone, calm down," Naomi begged. But it was too late. In one swift motion, Tyrone reached into the waistband of his jeans and pulled out a handgun. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as she watched him point it directly at Jamal. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Jamal's eyes widened in shock, the manila envelope falling from his hands to the ground. There was a loud crack as the gun went off. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the narrow street. Naomi screamed as she watched Jamal stumble backward, clutching his chest as blood began to seep through his crisp white shirt. He collapsed onto the sidewalk, his body jerking violently before going still. "Tyrone, what the FCK are you doing?" Naomi shrieked, her voice raw with terror. She rushed toward Jamal, but Tyrone grabbed her arm, yanking her back with such force that she nearly fell to the ground. "He ain't gonna touch you again," Tyrone growled, his eyes wild with rage. "I told you I wasn't playing, Naomi." Naomi's mind was spinning. She had to get away, had to call for help. But before she could even think, she heard another car approaching. A beat-up Toyota rolled up behind Tyrone's Camaro, and Naomi felt a wave of dread wash over her. It was Elijah. His innocent, boyish face was distorted into something dark, something unrecognizable as he stepped out of the car. Naomi's heart sank as she realized what was happening. Elijah had been following her, just like Tyrone. He had seen everything. "Elijah, please," Naomi whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to reason with him. "Just go home, okay? This isn't what you think." But Elijah wasn't listening. His eyes were glued to Tyrone's gun, then to Jamal's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood on the sidewalk. His hands trembled as he took a few shaky steps toward Naomi, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I knew it," Elijah whispered, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I knew you were with him. You were never going to leave him for me. You lied to me, Naomi." "Elijah, please," Naomi repeated, her voice barely a whisper now. But Elijah wasn't listening. Without warning, Elijah lunged at Tyrone, screaming incoherently as he tried to wrestle the gun from his hands. Tyrone fought back, but Elijah's desperation gave him an edge. The two men grappled on the ground, fists flying, the gun skittering across the pavement as they struggled for control. Naomi watched in horror, frozen in place as the fight unfolded before her. She could hear Elijah's frantic breathing, the sound of flesh hitting flesh, the scrape of shoes on concrete. It all felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And then another shot rang out. The gun had gone off again, but this time it wasn't Tyrone or Jamal who had been hit. Elijah lay motionless on the ground, blood pouring from a bullet wound in his chest. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the sky. He was dead before he even realized what had happened. Tyrone stood over him, breathing heavily, the gun still smoking in his hand. For a moment, everything was silent, deadly, suffocating silence. Naomi felt like she was drowning in it, her chest tight, her mind blank with shock. You killed him," Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. Tyrone didn't respond. He just stood there staring down at Elijah's body like he couldn't quite believe what he had done. The police arrived soon after, alerted by a neighbor who had heard the gunshots. Tyrone was arrested on the spot, still clutching the gun. He didn't resist. He didn't say a word as they handcuffed him and led him away. Naomi was taken in for questioning, her mind still reeling from the night's events. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop replaying the moment the gun went off, the sight of Jamal's blood-soaked shirt, Elijah's lifeless body on the pavement. It felt like she was living someone else's life. This couldn't be real, but it was. Tyrone was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. During his trial, his defense team argued that he had acted in a fit of passion, that his love for Naomi had driven him to a breaking point. But the evidence was damning. The prosecution painted him as a violent, possessive man who had coldly executed 2 people in a jealous rage. Tyrone was sentenced to 50 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, a victim of his own obsession. As for Naomi, she wasn't charged with any crime, but the weight of what had happened would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her marriage to Marcus disintegrated shortly after the trial. He couldn't forgive her for the lies, the affairs, or the deaths that had resulted from her actions. He moved out, taking the kids with him, and Naomi was left alone in the same brownstone that had once been her sanctuary. But it wasn't a home anymore. It was a prison, a constant reminder of the lives that had been destroyed by her deception, by the dangerous game she had played. Naomi never fully recovered. The whispers in the neighborhood, the judgmental stares, the cold looks from people she once considered friends, all of it weighed on her until she could barely leave the house. She became a ghost of the woman she once was, trapped in the memories of a life she had destroyed with her own hands. And as the years passed, the story of Naomi Harris, the housewife whose secret life led to murder, became a cautionary tale in Brooklyn. A story of obsession, deception, and betrayal that shook the neighborhood to its core. But for Naomi, the real punishment was living with the knowledge that, in the end, she had been the one to pull the strings, and she had lost everything.